Eliza Wren unlocked the condemned man's cell while the gallows crew was still testing the rope. The sound came up through the jail floor in slow wooden thuds, like the town itself had a heartbeat, and this morning it meant to spend it on Caleb Mercer. Lantern light shook along the corridor bars. Beyond them, the world was black-blue with that last hour before dawn when every promise feels either holy or fatal. Caleb stood when she slid the key in. He did not come toward her. He only watched, one hand curled around the bars, his face drawn from 6 nights in a cell and 2 hard years of grief nobody in Dry Creek had ever bothered to name. "If this is pity," he said quietly, "save it. I can walk to a rope on my own." "It isn't pity." Eliza turned the key. "You said June Bell would die if you swung. You have one chance to explain that before I decide I've lost my senses. Before we go any further, settle in where you are tonight and tell us in the comments where you're listening from. A story always feels warmer when you know who's sitting beside the fire with you." His eyes did not leave hers. Gray, tired eyes that had already buried too much and no longer wasted effort pretending otherwise. "Amos Pike kept false deeds and debt papers at his Bitter Creek line shack," he said. "June Bell found out after Pike stole her land. She went looking for proof. Seth Pike locked her in the cellar under the smokehouse. The boy got word to me. I tried to reach her. Amos stopped me in the street, drew first, and lost." Eliza held the key still in the lock. Amos Pike had been the richest rancher in 3 counties and cruel in the smooth, polished way rich men often preferred. He owned freight routes, grazing contracts, and most of the debt in Dry Creek. 2 weeks ago, he had died in the street with Caleb Mercer's bullet in his throat. The judge's order for hanging had followed with suspicious speed. Eliza had not liked any part of it, but dislike and jailbreak were still a long, hard mile apart. "Why tell me now?" she asked. A bitter half-smile touched Caleb's mouth. "Because your father intends to kill the only witness left who knows where that proof is buried. And because I've listened to you talking to frightened horses in the livery every evening. And a woman who can calm terror without lying to it is not usually a fool." There it was, a strange, clean truth in the stale jail air. Eliza was 32 and had spent half her life mistaken for a quiet spinster, and the other half learning the usefulness of letting people keep their mistakes. She moved softly, spoke little, stitched wounds, gentled half-broken horses, and read letters aloud for women whose husbands would sooner lose a tooth than admit their wives could not read. Men saw those things and thought softness. They never noticed she moved softly, so she could hear more than they did. Another thud shook through the floorboards. That decided it. She pulled the door open. "Come on," she said. He stared at her once, as if she were the first door in months that had not led toward loss. Then he stepped out. The jail smelled of cold iron, lamp smoke, and old sweat. Her father, Sheriff Thomas Wren, had gone home 40 minutes earlier to wash and return for the hanging with a clean collar and a face the town trusted. Thomas Wren believed in order the way some men believed in Scripture. Swept porch, honest ledgers, punishment on time. He had once told Eliza that law existed so decent people could sleep. He never understood that sometimes decent people lay awake because of it. She led Caleb down the back corridor to the storeroom where confiscated tack and feed were kept. There she had hidden a wool coat, a canteen, a saddlebag with bread and jerky, and her mother's old revolver wrapped in a flour cloth. "You planned this," Caleb said. "I planned for the possibility that I might stop obeying people before I had all the details. That is a dangerous habit. It runs in families." He took the coat. His fingers brushed hers, rough, calloused, warm despite the cold. And for one foolish second, she became aware that this was not somebody else's daughter in a story. This was her, in her father's jail, before dawn, running with a man he had sworn to hang at sunrise. They went out through the rear door and cut across the alley to the livery. Juniper, Eliza's bay mare, snorted softly when she saw her mistress. Caleb's dun gelding lifted his head from the stall and pawed once. "You still trust me with your horse?" Eliza asked. "He's smarter than I am," Caleb said. "He'll decide." The gelding let Caleb saddle him without protest. From behind the jail came another creak of rope. Eliza felt it in her teeth. "Once we ride out," Caleb said, tightening the cinch. "There is no version of this where your father does not think I stole you. Then you'd better not waste the trouble." They mounted and rode north out of town by the creek road just as the sky began to silver. No shouted alarm came behind them yet. Only the soft drumming of hooves on frozen ground and the sound of Eliza's whole life closing like a door she had finally chosen to walk through. By the time the jailer found the empty cell, the sheriff's daughter was already gone with the condemned man. Thomas Wren did not curse when he found the door standing open. Men had spent 20 years in Dry Creek taking their emotional weather from his face, and he knew better than to give them panic to borrow. But Deputy Harlan, standing pale beside the empty cell, later said the sheriff had gone quieter than a grave, and that was how he knew the day had turned dangerous. They found Eliza's note on the desk. He drew first. June Bell is alive. Bitter Creek Line Shack. If I am wrong, I will answer for it. Eliza. Harlan read it twice and spat into the sawdust. Mercer got into her head. Thomas folded the note with terrible care. My daughter doesn't have a head anyone gets into without permission. He lifted his rifle from the rack and said, saddle up. The ride to Bitter Creek began in silence. Frost silvered the low grass. Ravens moved through the pale sky in black strokes. Thomas rode his gray hard enough to anger the animal, because he could not yet afford to think like a father. Thinking like a father would have put his hands to shaking. He thought instead like a lawman. Amos Pike had been dead 2 weeks. Caleb Mercer had been found over the body with a smoking revolver. Witnesses swore Pike had reached for his gun, but none had spoken boldly enough to stop the noose. Thomas had told himself the speed of the sentence was efficiency. He had told himself the unease in his gut was sentiment. He had told himself many things in order to keep moving. Now his daughter had ridden out before dawn with the very man he meant to hang. What unsettled him most was not that Eliza had disobeyed him. She had done that in small, skilled ways for half her life. It was that she had done it on behalf of someone. Eliza never moved for gossip, novelty, or impulse. If she had opened that cell, then she believed something worth wrecking herself over stood on the far side of it. That thought rode with him like cold iron. By mid-morning, the scandal had spread faster than fire in dry grass. Seth Pike took to the streets telling everyone Caleb Mercer had seduced the sheriff's lonely daughter and fled with her into the hills. That version pleased people far too much. It made the world simple again. A wicked man. A foolish woman. A sheriff shamed. Folks could understand that. Truth is always harder to keep in the mouth than a good, ugly story. Eliza and Caleb rode east through juniper breaks and low cottonwood bottoms where the creek bent toward Bitter Creek country. The cold eased as the sun climbed, leaving behind the smell of thawing mud and crushed sage under the horses' hooves. Neither spoke much for the first hour. Trust takes time, and they had met only in stolen glances through jail bars and one impossible act of defiance before dawn. Eliza broke the silence first. If I decide you lied to me, I will shoot you myself before my father gets the chance. Caleb nodded. Fair enough. That doesn't trouble you. Trouble and surprise are different things. They stopped at a creek crossing to water the horses. Caleb crouched at the bank and studied the mud with the patient focus of a tracker reading scripture. You were Army? Eliza asked. Scout for a while. Then freight. Then whatever work kept grief fed. He said it flat, and that told her more than a finer speech would have. She saw the shallow scar at his jaw when he looked up. You have a wife somewhere waiting for you. Not anymore. He dipped water over his face. Fever took her 3 winters back. My girl followed that spring. After that, I mostly worked where people preferred not to ask questions. The creek ran over stones with a bright, indifferent sound. Eliza sat back on her heels. I'm sorry. I know. He stood. Your turn. My mother died having a baby that never breathed. After that, my father loved me like a man guarding the last dish in a house after an earthquake. Men came courting once or twice. None of them really saw me. After a while, the town decided I had chosen to stay alone. Had you? If you stand still long enough, she said, people start calling it a choice. By noon, they found Ned Bell hiding his mule in a stand of scrub oak below the Bitter Creek Ridge. The boy was 14, all elbows and fear, with dust on his cheeks and a rifle held too tight. When he saw Eliza, relief hit him so hard his knees nearly folded. Miss Eliza, he gasped. I knew you'd come. June Bell was alive, he said. Seth Pike had moved her from the cellar at dawn to the line shack, planning to burn it after taking the papers so no witness or proof would remain. Seth was riding there already with hired men, and Deputy Harlan had promised to delay the sheriff until afternoon. Eliza and Caleb looked at one another. So Harlan's bought, Eliza said. Bought or rotten for free, Caleb answered. The line shack sat in a cottonwood hollow an hour farther east. They rode hard, Ned clinging to the mule's mane, the world narrowing into hoofbeats, wind, and fear at the back of the throat. At the edge of the hollow, Caleb slid down first and signaled them low. Smoke rose from the shack chimney, thin and mean. 2 Pike men stood by the corral. A third smoked by the door. Seth Pike's black gelding was tied to the hitch rail. June was inside. Caleb studied the hollow in one sweep. I draw them left. You take the back. Eliza was already shaking her head. No, Seth expects you. He doesn't expect me. Ned started to protest, and she cut him off. You stay down. If things go wrong, you ride to my father and tell him everything exactly as it happened. Not the dramatic version. The true one. Caleb caught her wrist before she moved. His hand was warm, strong, and unsteady in a way that told the truth. If you don't come back out that door, he said, I will kill every man in that yard and not sleep poorly after. She held his gaze. That would be a shame. I'm beginning to think you sing too well to waste. She circled wide through the cottonwoods and came up behind the shack where the smell of smoke and horse sweat hung under the trees. At the rear window, she heard Seth Pike inside, smooth as lamp oil. You should be grateful, Mrs. Bell. Men have died for less than your little bit of stubbornness. June answered through pain. May God remember that when you ask him for mercy. Seth laughed. Eliza went through the back door, so quietly the hinges barely complained. Seth turned too late. She had her mother's revolver leveled at the center of his chest. Well, he said, the sheriff's daughter really did run off with him. I came for June Bell. You came for a story to tell yourself, so you can stand what you've done. He leaned back against the table as if guns had never frightened him. Do you know what town is saying? That Mercer charmed a lonely woman and stole her from her father's own house. Unlock her. Or what? Or I prove my father raised at least one of us with a spine. His eyes narrowed then, just enough to show the smaller, meaner man living under the polish. At that exact moment, a shot cracked outside. Then another. Caleb. Seth lunged. Eliza fired. The bullet smashed the lantern on the table instead of his chest, spraying oil and glass. Seth cursed and drove into her. They hit the wall hard. June cried out from the cot. The room filled with lamp smoke and the sharp stink of spilled fuel. Seth caught Eliza's wrist in both hands and slammed it against the boards until the revolver dropped. He was stronger than she expected and crueler than he needed to be. You should have stayed home sewing, he hissed. Eliza drove her knee into him and broke free long enough to seize the poker from beside the stove. She swung. It caught him across the temple. He staggered, cursing, and she used the breath to run to June Bell. The widow's ankle was bound and swollen purple. A ring of keys lay on the floor by the cot. Outside, the gunfire thickened. Eliza slashed June loose, dragged her toward the back, and heard Caleb shout her name over the noise. What would you have done there, with your father hunting you, a wounded widow in your arms, and the whole town ready to believe the ugliest version by supper? Would you turn back and beg the law to be fair this time, or keep running with the only man who had not lied to you yet? The answer came in boots on the porch. Seth Pike, blood at his temple now, snatched up a rifle and blocked the door. Going somewhere, he asked. The storm broke wide open. Caleb came through the window. Glass burst inward around him. He hit the floor low, fired once from a crouch, and Seth's rifle jumped from his hands. The room turned to noise and splinters. One Pike man rushed the porch and went down under Eliza's second shot with the dropped revolver. Another smashed in through the rear, and Caleb met him so fast, it looked less like fighting than a hard decision arriving in flesh. Short breaths. Hot powder. June Bell praying through her teeth. Seth crawling for the fallen rifle. Then Sheriff Thomas Wren filled the doorway with his Winchester leveled and fury cold enough to stop blood. Eliza. For one impossible heartbeat, father and daughter stared at one another across gun smoke, each seeing the other in a story that had gotten away from both of them. Harlan's with Pike, she shouted. Thomas's face changed. That was all the proof he needed that the floor beneath his certainty had rotten boards in it. Harlan appeared right behind him with a pistol already raised. Sorry, Sheriff, the deputy said. Everything narrowed. Thomas half-turned. Too slow. Caleb fired first. The bullet took Harlan high in the shoulder and spun him backward into the porch rail. The deputy's shot went wild into the rafters. Thomas wheeled and knocked the pistol from his hand with the rifle stock. Seth Pike made one last reach for the gun by his boots, and Eliza stepped on his wrist until something cracked. Silence hit the room, so suddenly it rang. Outside, the last of Pike's hired men broke for their horses. Men paid by cowards are brave only while the money seems likely to survive the afternoon. June Bell was crying. Ned Bell was in the doorway with his mule reins in one hand and terror in the other. Thomas Wren looked from Harlan in the dirt to Seth Pike under his daughter's boot to Caleb Mercer, standing with blood on his sleeve and smoke around him. "Somebody," the sheriff said at last, voice rough with all that had broken inside it. "Better start at the beginning." They stayed in the line shack until dusk because June could not ride at once, and because even justice needs a minute to get its breathing back after a gunfight. Thomas bound Harlan himself. He bound Seth next, ignoring every threat until the younger man ran out of arrogance and found fear underneath it. Then the sheriff sat at the table with Pike's ledger, the false deeds, the notes of payment to Harlan, and the order from the circuit clerk rushing Mercer's execution before witness depositions could be taken. Not law. Murder in a clean collar. The light outside softened to copper. Inside, the shack smelled of coffee, blood, damp wool, and wood smoke. June slept at last after Eliza set her ankle properly. Ned dozed by the stove with a blanket around his shoulders. Caleb sat on the back step with a fresh bandage around his forearm where a bullet had grazed him. Eliza brought him coffee in a chipped enamel cup. "You're bleeding through it," she said. "I've had worse days." "You're very modest for a man who just came through a window into gunfire." He looked up at her, and the hard lines grief had drawn in his face seemed to loosen for the first time. "Truth is, I was afraid the whole while. That's not the part people tell later." "No," he took the cup from her hand, his fingers brushing hers. "But fear's just the body asking whether the heart really means it." She sat beside him on the step. Night was coming on blue and clean. Bitter Creek whispered beyond the cottonwoods. "My father will never forgive me for opening that cell," she said. "He might. You don't know him. I know a man who rode into a crossfire for his daughter before he had all the facts." That quieted her. After a moment he said, "I listened to you in the livery every evening, talking to horses, humming while you worked. I think I knew your loneliness before I knew your face." Eliza did not answer at once because the words went into her more deeply than she was prepared to admit. "At some point," she said softly, "I stopped expecting anyone to notice whether I was lonely. It seemed simpler." He turned to her then, all pretense gone from his tired gray eyes. "Lonely and simple are rarely the same thing." She looked toward the dark creek so she could keep speaking. "After my mother died, everybody praised me for being steady, useful, quiet. I became the woman people trusted with their fear and their fever and their horses in full. But nobody asks a lantern what it wants, so long as it keeps giving light. After my wife died, folks called me strong," he said. "What they meant was empty enough not to inconvenience them." She laughed once, painfully. "We have been admired all wrong." "Seems so." Then Caleb said, so quietly she almost missed it, "Strange thing is, hearts that have been left in the dark too long still remember where the windows go." She turned to him, truly to him, not the condemned man in her father's jail, not the outlaw Dry Creek had named, just Caleb, scar at the jaw, weariness in the eyes, kindness he had no reason left to spend and yet kept spending. She laid her hand over his. "If this story is getting hold of you right here, a like and a subscribe help keep the lantern lit." Thomas came to the doorway then and saw their joined hands. He looked away almost at once, but not before Eliza saw the knowledge pass through him that his daughter had crossed some line deeper than scandal and was not coming back unchanged. "We ride at first light," he said. "Dry Creek hears this from me before Seth Pike tells it his way." By the time they reached Main Street with Seth and Harlan tied in their saddles and June Bell in the wagon, every face in Dry Creek had arranged itself into some version of hunger. Scandal first, truth later. That is the natural order of a small town. Thomas Wren climbed the jail steps, took off his hat, and read the documents aloud. He read every false deed, every extorted mark, every debt altered after signature. He read the payment note to Harlan. He read the clerk's rushed order. He read until the crowd changed its breathing. You can hear shame when it starts in on a town. Boots shifting, throats clearing, people discovering that what they enjoyed yesterday now tastes bitter in the mouth. Seth Pike tried to shout over him until old Mabel Coyle, whose grazing land had been stolen 2 winters earlier, stepped out of the crowd and slapped him hard across the face with her work-rough hand. "That's for my husband," she said. Nobody defended him after that. By noon the territorial marshal had arrived. By sunset Seth Pike sat in the very cell built for Caleb Mercer. Harlan sat in the next. Pike Holdings, Pike Accounts, Pike Contracts, Pike Reputation, seized, stripped, and broken open for restitution. The powerful who had lived by crushing decent people did not leave with dignity. They left with iron, public disgrace, and nothing else. Then the marshal stepped outside and in front of half the county said, "Caleb Mercer is cleared of all charges. Self-defense is established. He is a free man." Free. It did not sound like triumph. It sounded like a gate opening onto land a wounded horse is not yet certain it can cross. Eliza stood on the boardwalk outside the mercantile while the crowd made way for him. Caleb looked up at her. For one still moment, all the noise around them dimmed. Then Thomas Wren came down the jail steps. The sheriff looked at Mercer a long time. "You saved my life in that shack." Caleb answered plain. "I saved the truth," getting interrupted. A corner of Thomas's mouth moved despite itself. "My daughter rode off with a condemned man before dawn and handed the town 6 months of gossip in one morning." "She did," Caleb said. "She also turned out to be right." Thomas drew a slow breath. "I have spent years thinking I was protecting her when half the time I was only standing in front of her light." Eliza felt that one all the way down to the bone. Thomas looked at her then, and his face was older and kinder than it had been at sunrise. "I can't promise I liked this method." "I didn't like it much either," she said. "That makes me feel no better." Then Thomas faced Caleb once more. "You planning to leave?" Caleb glanced at Eliza before answering. "Only if she asks it." The sheriff followed that look and understood more than he wanted and exactly enough. "The livery roof leaks," he said gruffly, "and the Bell place needs fence mended. Dry Creek could use a man who knows the difference between fear and cowardice." Caleb smiled. "Sounds almost like an invitation. It is the best you'll get out of me in public." The practical world followed. Land was restored. Leases were corrected. Widows got deeds back under their own names. Men who had once tipped their hats to Pike learned the cost of admiring power more than character. June Bell kept her acreage. Ned Bell spent the winter telling anyone who would listen how he had helped bring down the biggest thief in the county. Caleb stayed. He fixed the livery roof first, then the church gate, then half the broken things around town people had stopped noticing because broken had become normal. Eliza stitched his knuckles twice, his shoulder once, and his heart without either of them naming that work for what it was until naming it became impossible to avoid. When he finally kissed her in the stable doorway one thaw-soft evening in March, it was careful and grateful, the kind of kiss that belongs to people who have buried too much to waste tenderness once it finds them. They married in October under a clear white sky behind the church because Eliza refused fuss and Caleb said he would stand beside her anywhere God could still locate him. June Bell cried through the vows. Ned stood straighter than the preacher. Thomas Wren placed his daughter's hand in Caleb's with the solemn face of a man entrusting his whole heart to another pair of mortal hands and discovering, to his surprise, that trust could feel like peace. 3 years later, on a late summer evening sweet with cut hay and creek water, Thomas sat outside the livery watching a dark-haired little girl chase barn cats through the dust while Eliza laughed from the porch and Caleb came in from the fields with their baby boy asleep against his shoulder. Folks still sometimes called her the sheriff's daughter when they forgot themselves, but mostly they remembered better now. She was the woman who had opened a cell because truth mattered more than appearances, and the man beside her was proof that some people walk all the way to the noose and still live long enough to find the porch light that was meant for them. The valley lay under honey-colored dusk, and the cottonwoods along Bitter Creek held their gold against the coming dark. Next time, we'll tell the story of the deaf seamstress sent west because her family was ashamed of her, and the blind rancher who saw her worth before anyone else dared to look.